Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is Mike Consul, your host. In addition to being the host of this podcast and interviewing novelists, I am a novelist myself. I have 3 published novels. My latest is titled Lolita Firestone, a supernatural novel, and it is set in Sedona, Arizona and Cairo, Egypt. My previous novel is titled Family Recipes, a novel about Italian culture, Catholic guilt, and the culinary crime of the century. And my first novel is named Hardwood, a novel about college basketball and other games young men play. And that story deals with issues ranging from depression and racism to sex, religion, and university politics. All 3 novels are listed in the episode notes. I hope you will buy them, I hope you will read them, and I hope you will thoroughly enjoy them. Now, on with our program. My guest is Benjamin Taylor, author of the relatively new memoir titled Here We Are, a book that discusses his very close relationship with the great Philip Roth, one of my favorite novelists and a favorite novelist of countless other people, and one of the most celebrated fiction writers of his generation, no question about it. I read Here We Are. In fact, I devoured it because I've read almost every novel Philip Roth has written, and I've long been fascinated by his career, his willingness to so boldly experiment with his fiction writing, really doing things that I think most other people would have just said, you can't do that. Well, who says? Philip Roth just forged ahead and was one of the most inventive novelists really ever. Philip Roth died, though, on May 22nd, 2018, of congestive heart failure. He was 85 years old. Now, our guest, Benjamin Taylor, himself has won writing awards such as the Los Angeles Times Christopher Isherwood Prize. His book, Proust, The Search, was named a Best Book of 2016 by Thomas Mallon of the New York Times Book Review. And his book, Naples Declared, A Walk Around the Bay, was named a Best Book of 2012 by Judith Thurman and The New Yorker. These are big name publications and reviewers recognizing his work. He is also the author of 2 novels, one of which is titled Tales Out of School, winner of the 1996 Harold Ribelow Prize, and The Book of Getting Even, intriguing title. Again, The Book of Getting Even, winner of a Barnes & Noble Discover Award. He edited the book Saul Bellow, Letters, named a Best Book of 2010 by Michiko Kukutani, one of the most famous, one of the greatest book reviewers of all time, and Jonathan Yardley as well in the Washington Post. And he also edited a book of Bellow's collected nonfiction titled There's Simply Too Much to Think About, also a New York Times editor's choice. That's not the totality of it. The accolades go on from there, but in the interest of time, I'll leave it at that and say, Benjamin Taylor, thank you for coming on the program to discuss your friend and colleague, Philip Roth.
Thank you, Mike. Pleased to be with you.
Glad to have you. And let me ask, first of all, about the formation of your friendship with Philip Roth. How did it begin?
It began with a letter I wrote to him after reading I Married a Communist. And I was very taken with the book, particularly the last pages of it. I thought they were sublime. And so I wrote to say so. And a couple of days after I sent the letter off, my phone rang, and it was Philip wanting to talk. And thus began a telephonic friendship that after I moved to New York and he moved more or less full-time to New York, we would see each other. We saw each other first for lunch frequently and then for dinner, and we became the best of friends.
What was it you said about I Married a Communist? That's one of the books I may have read. And what was it that you had to tell him? If you don't mind saying, what was it that you had to tell him about the book?
Well, it's that beautiful moment when the little protagonist is taken out by his mother, and the grandmother has died that day, and the little boy says, "Which star is she now?" And the mother points to one particular star and says, "There she is." Beautiful, simple, and I was a fan before that book, but I became an arch fan in the wake of it.
Tell us about Philip Roth as a person. I mean, people are intrigued by him. He's obviously a guy who been very straightforward at times. But a little bit of an enigma, I think, to most readers. What were some of the hallmarks of his personality and maybe your friendship with him?
Oh, I think that he liked being an enigma. I don't think he wanted to be figured out or found out. He was an extremely witty person. He was also a person with a strong streak of vengeance in him, and he never forgot a wrong, but he never forgot a good deed either.
Now, he died at age 85, like I said. What age was he when your friendship started?
I think he was about 67 when our friendship started.
So you were with him when he wrote, well, a lot of books, but one of the distinguishing marks of his career, and you check me on this, but he had this tremendous creative explosion in his 70s, and I think it was in the 70s when he wrote the American Pastoral and The Human Stain, and I believe I Married a Communist was part of that grouping.
Yes, he was in his late 60s and early 70s when he had this creative explosion. No other way to describe it. And he's one of the few writers you can say this about, that the best was saved for last. But he was indeed in his 60s and 70s at the top of his bent.
Did he account for that in any way? I mean, did you ever just say what's going on that you are really kind of reaching your apex at a time when most writers are running out of gas?
Yes, I wondered about it. I always wondered about it. One of the things he said was, "Well, I got out of a marriage that didn't suit me," and that he did, but I don't think that's an explanation. I don't really have an explanation. He worked extremely hard. This didn't come to him with any kind of ease. He would wake up in the morning, do his exercises, make his breakfast, and then go to work. And then he'd break off briefly for lunch. And then he'd go back to work. And then he'd break off briefly for dinner. And then he'd bring the pages of what he was working on into the house with him from the studio, and climb in bed at the end of the evening and work some more. He was a demon for work, and I think that had something to do with it. Instead of working the customary 3 hours a day, which is what a lot of writers put in, he put in 10-hour days.
Writing is such an exacting process that I understand why many people say, look, 2 hours a day does it for me, or 3 hours, or maybe 4 hours, because it can really drain the energy. Obviously, he had somewhat of an opposite effect on him. It seems like he was very maybe energized by it. My understanding is that he had a standing desk in his studio. I think he had some back issues, Benjamin, and he would stand and type. Is that true?
At one point in his life, he needed to stand in order to write, and then he installed a stool in front of the standing desk. But yes, there were standing desks in New York and in the country in Litchfield County. And there was a period when he simply could not sit down. But he's not the first writer to have had a standing desk. Saul Bellow had a standing desk, and so did Eugene O'Neill.
One of the interesting things about your friendship with Philip, it came along late in his life. And Philip Roth struck me as a person who really deplored the aging process. He said at one point, and I'm quoting, old age isn't a battle, old age is a massacre. Nobody likes getting older in certain ways. Certainly physically, it's not what we want it to be. But to what degree did he really struggle with it? Did you talk about aging a lot with him? Is it one of those subjects that he
yes.
spent a lot of time on?
I think it was the dominant subject. He deeply resented the aging process, as you say, and he was determined that it would not uh, detract from his creativity. But at the age of about 75, he retired. He really did retire from writing for publication. He went on and wrote some other things, not for publication, but he felt after the book called Nemesis that he'd struck a high note and that he wouldn't be able to do that again. And so he did pack it in. He knew when to work and he knew when to stop.
And he was a man who, it sounds like, was very aware of his legacy and looking to protect it.
Yes, it's interesting that his erotic life and his creative life declined on the same schedule, ended simultaneously, and he had written so much about being an erotic being that when that part of life was over, he had much less wish to go on writing. And he used to say that the latter years of his life had been the happiest. He expressed a great contentment. And about his art, he said, the demon has finally left me.
The demon being just this impulse that he had to write.
Yes.
Well, yeah. Yeah. You know,
it was 31 books and then he was done.
Yeah. I was surprised when I heard that he was retiring, because oftentimes people feel like writers I'm talking about, especially ones who have had a career as his, it's like breathing. I can't stop writing. Stephen King kind of makes it sound as though if I stopped writing, I would basically lose my mind. I go insane. So I just do it. I keep doing it. But he, as you said, though, he continued to write. He just decided to end on that high note. He never did. Actually, before I get into the Nobel Prize conversation, you mentioned he was a very sexual being. There's no question about it. His writing, it's just very much in his writing. He got pilloried by feminists for that reason. But as he aged, I mean, once that impulse was gone or the capability was gone, did he not? He seemed that beyond the sexual act, there was just the sensuality that may have extended simply to having physical contact with a woman, let's say. Was that not part of his repertoire, let's say, his erotic repertoire?
It was, and then it was over, and it was over on the same schedule as his creativity.
And he was content to just let that go. That part of my life is over. And obviously he had quite a life on that front.
In one mood, he would say that he'd never been happier. But in another mood, he would say, the days are very long now without work.
Yeah. Yeah. So what about it seemed like relentless criticism from so-called, feminists, that his writing, he objectified women. Women who know him, though, my understanding is they said he adored women. He was obsessed with women. And yet feminists were saying, because there was a lot of sexual content in some of his books, that he was objectifying them or didn't respect them.
When he lay dying, the bedside was crowded with women.
Wow. Yeah, I'm not surprised. He also, I guess, early in life, he discovered, and people around him discovered, that women were really attracted to him. He was one of those guys. I guess he was fairly tall and rangy, and he certainly an intellect, powerful intellect, and obviously a good-looking guy as far as the women were concerned.
And funny.
And funny. Women, yes. A sense of humor is one of the top things on women's lists.
Like many great novelists, he was a great mimic.
As in mimicking
voices.
What were some of his favorites?
Oh, it was, it was people he knew. He loved, what was the name of the man who has recently died, who did Dame Edna Everage? He could do a wonderful impersonation of Barry Humphries. That's the name.
Uh-huh.
Barry Humphries. He could do wonderful impersonations of Barry Humphries in both his famous roles, Les Patterson and Edna Everage. And he was a great admirer of Barry Humphries.
Now, his principal, I mean, he had many influences, but his principal influence was who? Saul Bellow, is that right?
I think it was reading The Adventures of Augie March in 1953 that set him on the path. That book he really wished to emulate, not in its themes so much as its energy. So, yes, I would say Bellow was very important to him, and also the translations of Louis Ferdinand Céline. Louis Ferdinand Céline was very important to his development. As for his contemporaries, I think the writer he looked up to most was Updike. They weren't exactly friends, but they were friendly rivals, and they ran a long foot race alongside each other.
You know, I remember reading a Philip Roth quote where he basically was saying, writing never comes easy. You know, no matter how much experience you have, writing never comes easy, except maybe for John Updike. He just seems to have the formula. And you know, the thing that really struck a chord with me when Philip said that is that when I read John Updike, I get that same feeling. It's like, does this even take any effort? It's just like flowing from his fingertips.
Yes. Well, he was a wonderful writer. There was a falling out between them. Philip had a tendency to fall out with people. I'm surprised he didn't fall out with me, but he never did. He fell out with Updike over something Updike had written in the New York Review of Books about Philip's marriage to Claire. I think he had a certain guilt about the marriage to Claire, and had to overcompensate for it by his hatred of her. But he really did. He was very strong in the revenge department, and there are at least 3 books in which Claire appears. Particularly, she appears in I Married a Communist. He had to exorcise those marriages and never quite could. His marriages were the worst dramas of his life, the first marriage and the second, both. He was a natural bachelor, not at all cut out for marriage, who married twice.
Yeah, it makes sense. You know, one of the things about his writing, I'm the sort of guy, if I'm in a bookstore and I open up a book and I see long passages of dialogue, I tend to put it right back on the shelf, because I just feel like I like an author who's in control of the copy and directs it, is in control from expository writing. But with Philip Roth, he would do long passages of quoted material. In fact, I remember one reviewer had said, you know, he's just expert at these motor mouth Jewish men. He'd write these long passages where they're just yakking away, and for whatever reason, he just had such a gift for dialogue. It never turned me off. I always found those passages to not only be artistic, but he was able to convey a lot of information without it sounding like he was preaching, or that he was overemphasizing a particular point he was trying to make.
Yes, I think many people have pointed this out, that he was unique in his gift for dialogue.
I think we have one thing we have in common, Benjamin, is our favorite Philip Roth novel, I believe. Which one is your favorite?
I think The Human Stain is my favorite.
Yeah, that's mine too. Yeah. I thought I heard you quoted on that. Tell me why.
Well, I think it's the book in which he goes deepest into the soul of the nation, and he goes deepest into Zuckerman, the narrator, and he goes deepest into the hero, Coleman Silk. It was the germ of the novel was an episode of political correctness at Princeton. His friend, Melvin Tuman, who was a sociologist specializing in race relations, kept calling roll at the beginning of the term. And there were these two students who were always absent. And he said, finally, do they exist or are they spooks? Well, it turned out that the two students were Black and all hell broke loose. And that, I think, gave him his novel. Mel Tuman was forced into an early retirement, like Coleman Silk. Mel Tuman wasn't from a Black family, but that's another thing about the book that fascinates me, the way he depicts a Black man who is not Black,
Mm-hmm.
who has severed all ties with the past and turned himself into a classicist, a Jewish intellectual professor.
And one of the things about Coleman that really struck me in that book was his determination to live that life, that he rejected his family.
Yes.
And
some of the most powerful pages Philip ever wrote are between the two brothers in that book. The brother who cannot forgive Coleman for his defection from race.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. He not only defected from the family, but he renounced his race to become what he was determined to become. On the one hand, it's admirable that somebody is that determined and that effective. On the other hand, obviously, being a family member would obviously find that offensive.
Well, so, when Coleman was fathering children, he kept wondering if the next baby would be Black, but it turned out not to be so.
It's just a tremendous book. I thought that American Pastoral also was. The Counter Life was one of my favorites as well.
Yes.
But his favorite, Philip Roth's favorite, he makes no bones about it. And I guess the answer comes very quickly, is Sabbath's Theater, which I believe won the National Book Award. Is that right?
It won the National Book Award, yes.
And that one was his favorite. Mickey Sabbath being the protagonist. Why did he ever articulate why Sabbath Theater was what he considered to be his best?
Yes, having written American Pastoral about a man as clean and good and admirable as Sweet Laveau, he now wanted to write the opposite. Somebody who excelled in nastiness and coarseness, vulgarity. He wanted to, as he put it to me once, let the whole creature out.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned he had fallings out with people, and there was some regularity. Talk about that a little bit. I've always seen Philip Roth as a guy who speaks his mind regardless of how it might land. Was that part of it?
Yes, and he didn't always wear his fame lightly. He was worried about people who, knowing him, would try to use him, or people who would go to the press with information about him. I think of one case in particular, somebody who talked to a journalist about Philip, and he deeply resented that kind of thing. On the other hand, he was a great friend to many, and as I say, the waiting room and the hospital room were full of friends, many of them women friends, many of them former lovers, when he was dying.
Now, of course, his father died before him, and what is it? The book Patricide, which is a memoir of his dad's death, where he was assisting his dad. Do I have the right book?
Yes, but it's called Patrimony.
Patrimony, that's what it is. Patrimony, yeah, Patricide. That doesn't make, yeah, Patrimony. And Were you friends with Philip when he went through that whole episode where he was taking care of his dad at the end?
That was before my time. But my
'Cause-
taking care of Philip constantly reminded me of that book, because I was one of Philip's two chief caregivers, and I was very happy to play that role. But it reminded me of what Philip said about how he took care of his own father.
Patrimony is just a beautiful book, and you can just imagine him, overseeing his dad, and then realizing, well, this is what I have to look forward to. This is what the end is like.
Yes.
And the go ahead, Benjamin.
So Phil, it's the book in which Philip first confronts the realities of old age. The realities of young manhood were his point of view for a long time. My Life as a Man, The Professor of Desire. These are young men's books, and Philip was determined to remain a young man. He raised no children, and that was one way of remaining young. But with the death of his father, there was no one left between him and the ditch, as it were, and he began to think about the wages of time.
So he died of congestive heart failure. He had multiple heart attacks, or at least he had multiple stents put in him. And I believe they couldn't really do anything more. They had done as much as they could in terms of medical intervention. Was his situation with the heart, with the heart disease, was that a genetic situation, or did he live a lifestyle that eat a diet, live a lifestyle that kind of led him down that path?
Oh no, he had a very healthy way of life. He was never a smoker. He was never a drinker to speak of, and he just was unlucky physically. He had, unlike his father or his mother, he had heart disease from middle age on, and he did have, I guess there was a silent heart attack that began all this, and then heart surgery. Rather than heart attacks, he tended to have heart surgery. But at the end, there was multiple organ failure. And I will never forget the courage with which Philip said to his doctors and to all of us who surrounded him, let's get on with it.
And what did that mean? The end of intervention? Just let me go?
Yes, he said he was ready to go. And I asked one of the doctors, is he afraid? And the psychiatrist said, no, absolutely not. There's no fear at all in him.
Philip is a well-known atheist, and I remember he was on Fresh Air with Terry Gross, and she pressed him on that just a little bit. She was a little surprised by it, and she pressed him on it, and he said, I have no, I think I've got him quoted almost exactly, I have no appetite for self-deception or self-delusion. Did he ever talk? I mean, oftentimes, oblivion is not what people want at the end. Although I used to work with a guy who said, when there's nothing there, there's nothing to be afraid of. What was Philip's take on that? Is there anything more to add to that?
Well, Saul Bellow believed that he was going to see his mother and father again after death. He really believed that. And Philip was just as certain that he would not. He believed simply in mortality and the brevity of what we may expect from life. And he was very impatient with religion. And yet there could be a sympathetic rabbi in his work. I remember in The Plot Against America, there's an awful rabbi, but then there's a very nice rabbi too. Philip enjoyed being Jewish, that's for sure, but it didn't extend to any kind of religious belief.
He enjoyed being Jewish, but he bridled at the assertion that he's a Jewish writer, correct?
That's true. He just wanted to be called an American writer.
Now, so many of his novels were set in Newark. Did anybody ever just say that you are a venue writer, or I'm not sure how you would, a locational writer? He didn't seem to have any, to my knowledge, didn't have any issues with the fact that he seemed to be writing about that particular locale pretty repeatedly. What I know, he grew up there, so he knew the territory. There's got to be a lot of wistfulness and nostalgia there, which probably lent itself to a lot of great writing. Anything to say about that, Benjamin?
Well, I think he felt that Newark was his terrain, imaginative terrain, in the way that Dublin was Joyce's imaginative terrain.
You mentioned The Plot Against America, great novel, one of my favorites of his. And not only a great novel, it was prophetic. Clearly, I mean, that just became a reference point to when, and before I say this, I'll just say I've never been a Democrat and I've never been a Republican, so I'm not making a political statement here, but when Donald Trump came into office, which as far as I could tell, Philip deplored him, but it's almost as though he saw it coming with The Plot Against America, not with Trump, just the tendency of human beings towards populism, towards fascism, towards the sort of thing that eventually demolishes a democracy, or at least diminishes it.
Well, he disliked the liberal idea that progress goes in a straight line, because he had so much evidence that it did not, particularly following the election of 2016. But he was really not writing. Obviously, he was not writing about Trump in that book, and he wasn't really writing about Bush either. He was writing about a kind of thought experiment he had. He read Arthur Schlesinger's autobiography, in which Schlesinger reports that some Republicans wanted to draft Charles Lindbergh for the nomination. And Philip wrote in the margins of his copy of Schlesinger's book, what if they had? That was the germ of the book, wondering, well, what if Lindbergh had run against FDR? He was the one person who really could have beaten FDR. And then he was off and running on his book. That was about the time he and I became friends.
Yeah, Charles Lindbergh. And there was a lot of dog whistles in there, right? I mean, there was a lot of language in there where he wasn't flat out saying things that were detrimental to, say, the Jewish population or other segments of the population. But there was, his audience understood.
You know, I was surprised that Philip never heard from any member of the Lindbergh family after that book came out, but he didn't. I thought they would have been furious. But the record is what it is. The Lindbergh record is what it is.
And he was anti-Semitic, or at least accused of being anti-Semitic, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So, okay, well, there you go. Yeah, I love that novel.
And pro-Hitlerian, felt that Hitler was a good bulwark against Bolshevism for the West to have.
So let's talk about the Nobel Prize for Literature. That's a prize that many people thought Philip should have been the recipient of. And I think it may have been in your memoir where somebody had said something along the lines of, Philip Roth doesn't give a rat's ass about the Nobel Prize. And then Philip turned around and said, what are you doing? You just guaranteed that they'll never award me the prize.
Every year he looked forward with trepidation to the announcement. It's not true that he didn't care about the Nobel Prize. He did care. And he joins that long list of very great writers who didn't win it. For example, Henry James and Tolstoy, Borges, Nabokov. It's quite a long list. of wonderful writers who didn't win the Nobel Prize. Wallace Stevens should have won the Nobel Prize. One could make a very, very long list of those who didn't and should have. Saul Bellow did win the Nobel Prize. Philip should have, but did not.
And that's an award that is, I don't even know the answer to this. Is that never awarded posthumously?
No, never.
Interesting. Okay. Well, that one went by the boards then.
Yes.
So, Philip seemed to be it could be a brooding sort of character, just brooding. But on the other hand, I get the sense that when he's among friends, if he was at a small gathering of friends, that he was a pretty effervescent guy, upbeat, and a guy with quite a personality, and a guy who made people laugh. Is that accurate characterization?
Oh, yes. He loved making people laugh, and he did make people laugh. His riff on the news of the day was unforgettable.
We were talking about influences. You mentioned Bellow. Malamud was another one. Kafka was another one, I believe.
Oh, yes. Very, very important. Kafka.
Yeah. Who would you add to that list? So Bellow, Malamud, Kafka.
Singer. Isaac Bashevis Singer. I don't know that Philip was influenced by Singer, but he certainly admired Singer. Everybody does. But he needed, mostly what he needed were American influences. And Bellow, who begins that book, Augie March, with the words, "I am an American, Chicago born, and go at things my own way. First to knock, first admit it." That's what ignited Philip.
That first sentence right there is almost like, it sounds like the match that lit his life.
Yes,
because he was very much, I'm going to do it my way.
Yes, and much less important than being Jewish is being American. And he was impressed by the speed of acculturation, assimilation, by the speed with which that took place in this country. Did not take place with the same speed in others. And I think he considered that the American luck, that you could come here and within a generation and a half, you were completely American. It had something to do with the Constitution, the fact that the person who has pledged his allegiance to the Constitution is as much an American as the person whose ancestors arrived on the Mayflower. We're all equally American. Nobody is more American than anybody else.
Now, Philip Roth said, the novel's day has come and gone because there are more compelling ways for people to occupy their time. Kind of a sad statement. But, I want to bring up to you, and I don't know if Philip, passed away before he noticed this, but when you watch Netflix or other streaming channels, there's just obviously this proliferation of shows, and I'm always pleased by how many are based on novels or short stories, some kind of fiction writing, and not original scripts, but they actually go to novels and short story collections and such to get their material. Yes. And move on. Did Philip ever witness that or ever observe that or say anything about it?
He was very interested in the adaptations of his work. And indeed, I saw the film of American Pastoral with him when he saw it for the first time. And he turned to me when it was over and said, "Not bad." It wasn't my opinion of the movie, but he was rather forgiving. There was a terrible movie made of Portnoy's Complaint, and he made a point of never seeing it. Everybody told him how terrible it was. And there was a movie made of Goodbye Columbus. He was fascinated by film. He watched movies every week. Fascinated by foreign films, Indian, the Satyajit Ray, for example, he loved. I think I write about that in my my little memoir, and he was. I think he made a point of saying in his will that The Plot Against America should never be made into a movie because he didn't want a Jewish caricature of his parents. But then, in the end, there was a movie made of The Plot Against America. Did you see it?
I did not. Was it a movie or is it a series?
It was a series.
Yeah, well, a streaming series. I have not seen it. Is it good?
I remember thinking it was good. Yeah, I guess I did think it was good. It certainly is overlaid with the drama of Trump. That's between the lines.
Mm-hmm. Was it the help me out here? It was the humbling where the college student goes to school, has a very rough time, meets the girl who he can't figure out whether she really cares for him or is just one of those, promiscuous girls. Has trouble with the students. So they made a movie out of that one, which I thought was pretty good. But I'm not sure. Was it The Humbling?
No, it was Indignation.
Indignation. That's it. And then he went off to, I believe, war after that.
That's his Korean War book.
There we go. Indignation. That's it. The Humbling is the one actually that's got Al Pacino in it. Is that right? I mean the movie.
Yes, The Humbling he just hated. It's the one with Al Pacino. Now that we talk about this, quite a number of his books were made into movies, and
yes,
I think there's going to be a stage play of Sabbath Theater.
Wow, that'll be interesting. The Human Stain was also made into a movie, and I thought they did a pretty good job of it. I loved that book, and it contains so much more content that was possible with the movie. But I still thought they did a pretty good job with that.
I think it's better to compare movies to other movies rather than comparing them to the books on which they're based.
Yes, yes. So let's go to early in Philip's life. He went to Rutgers. He went to Bucknell. He also attended the University of Chicago. Did he ever talk to you about his college years and what they were like?
Yes, he went to this. He said growing up, he didn't know anything about colleges. It's not something his parents ever talked about. And he went with a full ride to Bucknell. I mean, it didn't cost very much in those days. And there was a wonderful English teacher there who really shaped him. Mildred Martin was her name. And she told him what to read and how to read. And that was Mildred Martin. Then he went off to the University of Chicago, which was a revelation to him. This great intellectual center in the middle of the country. And he studied with Morton Darwin Zabel and others. And that was Richard Stern. His friend Richard Stern was, first of all, his teacher. And it was while at the University of Chicago that he first met Saul Bellow, who admired a story Philip had written, a story called The Conversion of the Jews. So that was all important. Then he got, let's see, he came to New York after the University of Chicago, and he had launched onto his first and catastrophic marriage, somebody he met while in Chicago. And Philip knew from the start that he wanted to be a novelist. He had the luck not to be tempted by poetry or by memoir or by anything. He just wanted to be a novelist in the great American tradition of novels. He read a lot of Henry James. He read, let's see, who else? He read a lot of the books that were popular and aren't read now, like They Shoot Horses, Don't They? And other books like that that were of their time and have not lasted. And I think he had the luck of being somebody who knew exactly what he wanted to do from about the age of 20. But at 25, he publishes Goodbye Columbus. That's he's been a story writer, and also he's produced a novella. And that book is the making of him. He at 25 wins the National Book Award, and he's off and running. He has some trouble along the way. Some books are better than others, but some plays by Shakespeare are better than others too. And he never really looked back. He wasn't subject to doubts about his talent. Even the books that I don't think are very good, like The Great American Novel, he produced with a lot of conviction.
Now, he did say, I can't think about the reader when he's writing. I can't think about the reader, which I think is a mistake many novelists and would-be novelists make, is they're thinking about the audience rather than what is inside them that needs to come out. What did he think about? I mean, was he just acting on blood impulse? This is the story that I have inside me, and this is what I'm going to take to market.
A character in trouble, a character in a desperate situation. That's what got him going.
Yeah, when you look over his career, that's very much the case as to what he wrote. Now, as you said, the Nobel Prize, he didn't win it. Make the case for Philip Roth winning the Nobel Prize. I mean, if he was alive today and you were making the argument before the Nobel Prize committee, what would you cite that points to the idea that Philip Roth should most definitely be a recipient of the prize for literature?
Nobody has revealed more of the life of his times. Nobody has revealed more of the 20th century American story. And these books were the product of particular historical circumstances, but after the circumstances have changed and are gone, the novels become more rather than less interesting, as The Plot Against America does, as The Human Stain does. So he has my vote.
Now, he knew you were going to write a memoir, is that right? And you wrote this, you didn't complete this memoir until after Philip's death, correct?
No, I didn't. But though he knew I was going to write a book about our friendship, it was his idea that I do so. But let's see, I published that book in 2020, and Philip died in 2018. He read my two previous memoirs, one called Naples Declared and one called The Hue and Cry at Our House, and it was a great help to me.
So did he have any expectations in terms of what he wanted including or not included, or did he just give you complete creative freedom without trying to in any way affect the content?
He said that this is your memoir, not mine.
No, good point. Yeah, it's your experience, not his. Your experience with him. So,
would he have liked the book? I don't know. I don't let myself think about that. My job was to tell the truth as best I could.
Talk about the approach you took to the book. I mean, is there anything to be, obviously it's a memoir. You're talking about your experiences, your time with Philip Roth. Is there anything you can tell us just in terms of how you approached it?
I used to be the slowest writer in America. Now I've become one of the fastest. And that was the book that I wrote at top speed. I didn't have to think about it. I didn't think about shapeliness or ordinance. I just sat down and wrote and found that the sentences were hooking on to one another just as they should. It was a very swift task.
Do you feel like you're a better writer today because of your friendship with Philip? I mean, did you spend a lot of time talking about writing and the craft in a way that made you feel fortified by it and a better writer?
Yes, I do feel I learned a lot from him. But I have to leave it to others to say how good a writer I am.
What are you working on now?
Well, I've just finished a biography of Willa Cather, which will be out in November. And I'm at work on tinkering with a novel, and I've also signed to do the Yale Jewish Lives series volume on Susan Sontag.
Oh, wow. Okay. Talk about your writing method. How do you write? What's your writing regimen like?
I like to write between lunch and dinner. That's a good time of the day for me. I'm not a morning person. I like to stay up late. I like to read. But as for writing, when I'm writing, I like to do it in the afternoon.
So how far out are you right now in terms of what you know you're going to write? You're tinkering right now with the idea of writing another novel.
Yes.
And then beyond that, do you have a slate of ideas that you just kind of keep on the back burner and see which one starts to really simmer?
Well, I have my own ideas, but the idea for the Sontag came to me from others, from her son, David Reef, who approached me by way of the editors at Yale to do that book. So that peach just dropped into my lap.
Now, what do you think Philip Roth's place will be in American literary history? I mean, some writers don't last that long. They're very popular, and they're popular for a certain period of time after their death, but then they kind of fade into the past. I don't know how many universities assign Roth novels in their classes. I would imagine there's many, but what do you think his place is in history, and how sustainable do you think it'll be?
I think it's sustainable, though he may go through a partial eclipse, as people do after they die. But I think that he was the best American novelist of the second half of the 20th century, along with Bellow.
Who are some of the other contemporaries he respected? I think Don DeLillo he met at one point.
Oh yeah, well they were friends. He and Don were friends and were a mutual admiration society.
So different. Their writing is so different, but they respected what each other was doing.
Yes, and so different as men, because Philip was a cut up, a mimic, a jokester, whereas Don DeLillo is an extremely silent man. It's almost comical. It's not that he's haughty. It's not that he's aloof. He's thinking. And he's
observing,
silent.
Taking lots of mental notes. I mean, and you really see that in his writing. That DeLillo, I don't think anybody does any better observation of just people in life than he does. I'm not surprised that he and Philip were friends.
Now Don could still win the Nobel Prize.
Yes. Remains to be seen. What else can you tell us about Philip that you think is integral? I mean, if the essential Philip Roth includes what characteristics or considerations?
Ambition, inspiration, discipline, an extraordinary gift, both for realism and, when he turned his hand to it, for postmodernism. You know, he's a case of somebody who tried out postmodernism in the counter life, and then went right straight back to realism. So that I found interesting. I think that maybe the postmodern novel was never the same after the counter life.
This is a personal question, Benjamin, but talk about your, after Philip's death. What was your experience like, just in terms of obviously he was a very close friend, or maybe your closest friend, and now suddenly he's gone. You knew it was coming, but at the same time, it's the death of a relationship. There's always some period of mourning or contemplation. What was your state of mind, or what was your lifestyle like in the near aftermath?
I started writing the book immediately after his death, so that was my way of grieving.
Mm. How long did it take you? You said this one came more quickly than your others, so the total time it took was how much?
I think about 6 months.
About 6 months. Yeah, that is quick. Interesting. Well, Benjamin Taylor, thank you so much for coming on the program. Like I said at the top, I have always been fascinated by Philip Roth. As soon as I learned who he was and started reading some of his material, he was enigmatic, and but I always admire just the sense of self and the sense of adventure that and the braveness that he brought to writing and his overall life. So to have somebody as close as you were to him, it's a treat to get a close up view of that. So thank you for taking the time.
We won't see his like again.
There really isn't anybody else like him, or really even close to that. Why won't we see his like again? I mean, is it just that he's an original, or has the world changed in certain ways that won't allow for it?
Well, we won't see the like of Henry James again either, or the like of Saul Bellow. The thing about major writers versus minor writers is that minor writers leave literature exactly as they found it. But a major writer is a kind of catastrophe for things as they are. Nothing is ever the same again. Nothing was ever the same after Henry James. Nothing was the same after Saul Bellow, and nothing is the same after Philip Roth.
Hmm. And for our listeners, there is a link in the episode notes to learn more about Philip Roth, philiprothsociety.org. The link is there. Also, if you'd like to learn about Benjamin Taylor, more about him and his writing, there is a link to his website in the episode notes. Benjamin, again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mike, very much.